Welcome to the Zero Trust Journey podcast, created by cybersecurity practitioners for those walking the same path. We share real stories, hard lessons, and hard-won victories from the field, so you can sidestep the pitfalls and deliver the wins. Grab your coffee, tune out the buzzwords, and let's get into the real story right here on the Zero Trust Journey podcast.
Hello and welcome everyone to Zero Trust Journey podcast. My name is Victor Monga. I am the co-host and producer of this podcast. Today is a very interesting workshop style, hands-on episode. So it's not your usual podcast where we just listen only. There's going to be a few things that we're going to be flashing on the screen. So if you can actually watch it on YouTube, that'd be preferable. With me, I have Jason and Jerry from Numberline Security. Jason, welcome back. We have done an episode with you where you had outlined the Zero Trust and ZTMM Plus. Today, we are going to go through a fictitious company assessment where they're considering Zero Trust and how they are leaning towards Numberline Security to do the ZTMM Plus assessment. So, Jason, Jerry, welcome to the show, and we'll get started.
Great. Thanks for having us, Victor.
So, let me ask you this question, actually. CISA has a Zero Trust maturity model with 5 pillars and a few things at the bottom: visibility, automation, governance. What is the difference between CISA's model versus your ZTMM Plus model?
So we're big fans of the CISA model. And we also acknowledge that it's not perfect and has areas for improvement. So if we zoom out for a second, one of the big elements of what we call the Zero Trust Blueprint is the Zero Trust Maturity Assessment. And that's what we're talking about here. As we have gone through performing maturity assessments across lots of organizations over the past few years, of course, we had to decide on what the model and the methodology was. And we gravitated toward the CISA model for a couple of reasons, but one of which is that, in fact, it does call out governance as a first-class citizen. So governance is, in fact, one of the 3 cross-cutting capabilities that spans all 5 of the pillars. And in our mind, governance is such an important part of Zero Trust that it deserves that very visible place. So as we went through this, of course, we recognized and we realized, hey, the CISA model doesn't really talk about this. We don't like the way it covers that. We think that this area is a little bit off target. So what we did was Jerry and I took a step back and said, okay, we've done a lot of these things, right? We've done dozens of these things. Let's formalize this and create something that captures all of our best practices around how we think a Zero Trust maturity assessment should happen. So what we did was that ended up being what we now call ZTMM Plus. And that's where we've kept the 5 pillars, we've kept the 3 cross-cutting capabilities, structures. Within those, we've done some refinements and enhancements. We've added about 10 new functions that we felt were missing. We changed about 10 of those functions as well to change their definition and change their maturity progression to better reflect the reality of what we see in enterprises today.
Got it.
That is what ZTMM Plus is.
And when was it released? Like the first time when you've done all the work and you put it out there in the public place, ZTMM Plus, when was it? A year ago, 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was about 1.5 years ago when we released that.
Okay. And in that time span, 1.5 years, have you found more things that you would consider adding as ZTMM Plus or ZTM Next Generation or whatever? Is there a next generation coming up?
Yeah, we're sticking with just versioning. So we're at version 1.2 right now. We have a bunch of plans for version 1.3. And these are including folding a couple of these functions together, adding another 1 or 2, and refining some things around that, as well as building out the set of supporting artifacts to make it easier to use.
And Jerry, the CISA Zero Trust Maturity Journey has traditional, initial, advanced, optimal. In your ZTMM Plus, are the journey steps are the similar, or have you guys added or removed something?
Yeah, so through that process, we maintained those four levels. But what we've done is we've actually separated some of them levels from just a 1.0 to 1.5 to a 2 to 2.5, really because not all organizations have done every component to mature to, say, an optimal level or an advanced level, where they could be just a step below, but they're not quite there. So we've kind of given some relevance to a number system that we're not necessarily 100% in love with, but a lot of organizations do want to have those types of comparisons to say, okay, we see where you are, where you want to go. So we're just given that capability to add some subjectivity to the overall maturity model.
Got it. I was at a conference yesterday, and one of the key statistics were presented. 86% of the organizations have started their Zero Trust journey but only 2% have achieved maturity across all pillars. This is from Cisco's Zero Trust Outcomes Report 2024. Do you agree with that stat? Have you seen that sort of same trend where a lot of people start, but only very subset of the large have actually achieved the maturity?
I think achieving maturity is a relative statement, right? Because as you called out, there are specifically in the CISA model, there's 5 pillars and there's 3 cross-cutting, and to achieve maturity across all of them is a very, very long journey. So for someone to say they've, for 2% to achieve all of that, I think that number in itself is impressive, because a lot of times it doesn't make a lot of sense for an organization to completely go across all 5 pillars, all cross-cutting capabilities and mature on all of them. I personally have yet to see that happen.
Okay. There was another question, common theme, by the way, among leaders yesterday at the conference, where every person wants to start Zero Trust journey. They have heard all the vendors from Zero Trust versus ZTNA, ZT Access. There was another term thrown around yesterday, Zero Trust Access Management. So instead of IAM, now it's Access Management. Anyways, add a ZT in front of any of your favorite acronym, and that's a new term. But most of the leaders were asking the same question that, hey, I want to start this strategy. How do I know what things to prioritize? Like, you have the pillars, identity, devices, and networks, applications, workloads, and data. And then you talked about governance and automation, visibility. Where do I start? How do I know what I have, what I don't, from the lens of Zero Trust?
So I'm going to share the picture here very briefly, because Victor, the question you have ties very much into the Zero Trust blueprint. Is something that we developed to answer exactly that question. And when we work with enterprises, we'd have these conversations. They would say, okay, I understand the maturity model, and maybe they look at the 5-step process for how they actually do the roadmap, but they were really uncertain on how they put this into the whole big picture. So we created this blueprint, which we launched about 6 months ago. We got very positive feedback from enterprises on it, providing the kind of structure they really need, where you start off in this assessment phase. And the Zero Trust Maturity Assessment, what we're talking about today, is a big part of that. But so is this organizational readiness conversation, which is typically 45-minute conversation. In fact, Jerry and I had one with a client earlier this morning, just around how are they approaching Zero Trust from an organizational perspective. Are they committed to it? Or are they just curious? How formal or informal is it going to be? What sort of business initiatives are underway, et cetera? And that type of upfront conversation. And this morning it was great because we had people disagreeing with each other about certain aspects of this. It turned into a really good debate. So those two things together are a really powerful assessment that leads into the creation of the Zero Trust strategy, which is a combination of the specific vision for the organization, and then the definition of what the Zero Trust program looks like. Change management board, program committee, steering committee, those types of things.
Sure.
And then finally, those things feed into the roadmap. And we've developed an information model and a methodology that takes these concepts that are well understood in the industry and then builds them into something that I would say is very precise and specific and usable, of looking at your business assets and their underlying protect surfaces. For each protect surface, you then look at their transaction flows and you design a set of access policies for those transaction flows. And then you map that to the set of capabilities, your environment, which you need to enable those access policies. And if you don't have those capabilities, then to develop a roadmap for, okay, I need to add technology X, I need to change process Y, and then I can start to enable these access policies for those protect surfaces and business assets. So all of this together gives organizations a really reliable and very focused and practical way of approaching Zero Trust, which is how we work with clients.
Got it. So this is what you use as to guide the leaders who are considering Zero Trust strategy, what, where, and how they need to start considering before the strategy is solidified. So this is almost like the legwork that they have to start working on. Is that true, Jason, Jerry?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
And we provide Obviously, as an advisory firm, we provide a set of consulting services around this, but we also provide a way for enterprises to do this to some degree on their own. Right? We have an organizational readiness survey, a free online survey that generates a customized report, and then the maturity assessment can be something where you do this yourself. We have a self-service toolkit, or it's something that you could hire us to help you, guide you, or to provide it as a full service offering.
Okay. Well, you know what? Let's jump into that part. We promised our audience that we will go through somewhat of a trailer or teaser of that assessment, what that looks like. Again, we can't cover everything. I'm sure that that's more than 10, 15 minutes of that assessment time that you take with the organizations. But I have a fictitious company, Precision Dynamic Manufacturing, PDM. They are in the manufacturing industry. They have high precision CNC. Again, small business. We're not talking about enterprise here, because a lot of time we also hear that the zero trust is just too complicated or complex or even not relevant to SMB. And we want to break that myth. We want to debunk that. Again, single location based out of LA, California, and they have about 200 employees, 880 full-time, few contractors, and it's just one company owner, CEO, and most of the IT stack is actually put together by the neighbor's kid who's really good with computers, and now he's graduating and off to college. So, and now also the CEO / the founder is concerned that they might have to go through CMMC compliance. So they want to go through some sort of strategy, and zero trust is what they anchored. Zero trust is what they felt that will help them. So let's go through that assessment, what you would do, but as a teaser and a trailer, what you would help your customers.
Okay, very good. So when we do this for real, we will have a fairly intense, in-depth workshop with the client where we talk about each of the 5 pillars: identity, devices, networks, applications, workloads, and data, and spend, in some places up to 2 hours going through each of those, where you have subject matter experts and the client cycle through. So, this is going to be by necessity a very lightweight type of thing. But what we do for each of those pillars is we talk about the certain specific functions and get an understanding of how they work in the organization, how they don't work. And we end up actually with very open and honest conversations with this, which is great. We always remind clients, this isn't an audit. No one's going to get judged or demerit if there's areas that haven't been invested in. So we're going to start off, and I'm going to make Jerry do the heavy lifting of starting off with the identity pillar and run it and start to put you on the hot seat, Victor.
Yeah, Jerry, before you do that, you mentioned something about functions. So we have seen or talked about pillars so far. Do you mind explaining what that functions means in this grand scheme of ZTMM plus?
Yes. And in fact, I'll share a sort of a completed assessment here where you can see the overall assessment for this fictional organization here shows the 5 pillars and the 3 cross-cutting capabilities. And for each of those, there's an assessed level of maturity. So those are the pillars. This is the high level view. And if we drill down here on one of the pillars, you can see that we have let's say the networks pillar here that we're looking at. And then within that, there are a set of functions that make up that pillar. And this is how CISA approaches it. And as I mentioned, we added and changed some of the functions.
Sure.
But within the networks pillar, you can see here network segmentation, network traffic management, traffic encryption, secure internet access, et cetera. So those are the functions that make them up. And within each of those functions, there's a specific maturity model that you can look at where the organization is for that specific function.
Got it. Okay. Jerry, take it away.
So in the identity pillar, to specifically call out those functions, right? We have 6 specific functions within identity: the user authentication, non-person entity authentication, identity stores roles and attributes, risk assessments, and access management. So these are 6 of the functions, not including the 3 cross-cutting with functions. So as I dive into this, one of my favorite conversations, and I think this is a great place to start, is in your organization, you have Office 365, you have some on-prem architecture. Tell me first about your privileged access management against your Office 365 environment, your global admins. How many do you have? How do you secure them? How do they authenticate? What do they look like in the environment?
Yeah. So again, I'm playing the role of a customer here of this PDS manufacturing company. Currently, as far as I know, there's only one global admin in my Office 365. I have access to it. I have the password. It's a sticky note under the mat in my office. So that's all I know. However, you asked about authentication. I'll get a little bit geeky here as well. For my on-prem applications, we have not integrated that with any of our Office 365 or any other authentication. So we all have our accounts for each application. So every user is getting around with a little notepad of about 5 and 6 credentials to log into their critical applications that they need to perform their job. So one is productivity, let's call it Office 365. Then 4 are the applications that to upload the drawings or download the specs or to how to operate CNC machines or to look at the jobs for the line managers. They have this platform or the website where they can see where the jobs are on the shop floor. So everybody has the local credentials that they log in. They all are admins of that platform as well right now, because we have never looked at this as a departmental segmentation.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Any on-prem, so as a users that have all these different applications, do you have on-prem Active Directory by chance as well?
No, just Office 365. What I understood from, again, the kid from the neighbor, there is some sort of Active Directory in Office 365. They call it an Entra ID. And we do not connect our Windows computers to the domain. They all are using local administrators. And so none of that is actually connected to our Windows computers or our PCs.
No, that's perfect. And first, I will say kudos for not having an on-prem Active Directory. I think that's important to call out. I think that's fantastic. However, the global admin, since you're the only user that uses that, I'm going to ask you a simple question. Do you rotate that password? Do you manage it? And more importantly, do you have multi-factor authentication enabled with that using something like Microsoft Authenticator or any other solution?
No, it's a text message. I know every time I call the person or the neighbor's kid IT, my IT staff, the IT team. Every time the IT team is logging in, I get the text. I give that code to him. No, I don't think so. We have ever rotated because there was no need for it. Why would we rotate it?
Yeah, so you're going against everything that we should be doing from a cybersecurity perspective. I'm going to say that. We could continue down this. I'm going to hand it over to Jason to talk a little bit more about network and network authentic or network side of the house. Go ahead, Jason.
Great, thanks. Now that Victor's starting to sweat so let's talk about the network. Obviously, you've got some sort of production network and an enterprise network. Tell us a little bit about how those are organized and if they're segmented in any way.
Sure.
Arthur.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned network because until this month, we just had our Spectrum Internet and that was our network. But again, this month we got a little bit serious because my IT team, again, neighbor's kid is going to college and we are looking to improve a few things to get ready for the CMMC. We're putting a firewall. Until, again, this month, everything was same network. My printers, my CCTV cameras, my computers, our servers are all on the same network. You can jump from one place to another, go from CNC machine on the shop floor to my database server, which is sitting in the data center. We have 2 physical servers, which are running a hypervisor. We have virtual machines because that was the best way to actually save on hardware, what I was told. But no fancy things in the networking so far. We do want to separate our Wi-Fi eventually because everybody's stealing our Wi-Fi. So we do want to separate that at one point, but that's a goal we will accomplish hopefully with this firewall that we are deploying this month.
Okay. So that's a start, and it's good that you have plans to deploy the firewall and put some level of segmentation in place. And it sounds like there are multiple zones or multiple VLANs that should be put in place around production network, guest network, enterprise network. And maybe it's as simple as that to start with. The key here is knowing which users and which devices should have access to the other areas. And this is very much, gets to the heart of governance, which is defining your firewall rule set will typically be, ideally be tied to identity attributes, such as identity group membership. And you've got to have a level of confidence that those identity groups have the right people and only the right people in them. Because today your network is at risk because you have everything that's open and flat. We all know that these OT types of equipment and systems are historically very vulnerable, have very weak security. And if anyone can get on your Wi-Fi and anyone can see your CNC machine, chances are anyone can look up the default credentials on the internet and log it in or take it down by taking advantage of a vulnerability or something like that. So coarse-grained segmentation, maybe just those three VLANs is a good step, but you've got to have a reliable way of understanding who this user is and what they should have access to. And this doesn't have to be super complicated, right? This can be as easy as employee groups and engineering groups and just some very coarse-grained understanding of the people that you already know in your head of, oh, these 20 people are in finance and marketing and sales. They don't need to get to the production network, to the OT network. Oh, these people are in engineering or they're, machine operators. Of course, they need to get to that network. Even that is a good step forward around controlling user and service access.
Jason, help me understand. So we can go through this exercise of finding out who needs access to what and when. But how do I maintain it? Because things are going to change. I'm going to add new things into those groups. So do you have a strategy or can you share almost like a plan where how do I keep up with this operational changes? Because things are going to change. People are going to change teams. Things will be added into my OT network or printers is a great example. Wi-Fi, how do I maintain these changes? Is it as simple as just get an Excel sheet or put it on a wall? Where do I maintain these ongoing?
So this is clearly in any organization, when you kind of work hard to document something and get things set up, then immediately 15 minutes later, something's going to change and something will be out of date. So you've got to understand how change happens, right? So this is going to be tied to the identity lifecycle or the device lifecycle or the system lifecycle. So we have a new contractor, we have a new employee, or someone changed roles. Okay, how does that get reflected in their access? Somebody's device broke or we got them a new device. How do we onboard that device and make sure that it has the right software, it has the right credentials on it, and it gets recognized? So a lot of this comes down to the overall life cycle and governance processes for those elements in your environment. Spreadsheets are going to be okay in some cases. If a 200-person company isn't going to have probably a huge volume of change, and a spreadsheet, that might be perfectly fine for a period of time versus it probably wouldn't make sense for an organization your size to put in place a big production identity governance system or something like that. But there are very lightweight identity lifecycle management solutions that have been designed that are fully SaaS-based, and that might be a start. But at the very least is a recognition that you need to have a defined process that people follow to keep this information up to date, or your policies, your access policies are not going to work.
It's almost like create a bucket, right? So bucket if there's a new computer, bucket for new server, bucket for new Wi-Fi, bucket for OT, so that when there's additions or modifications in those buckets, it gets updated. But at the end of the day, the policies of accessing those buckets should remain unchanged regardless of the devices coming in and out of that.
That's right.
So we do also have cloud and SaaS because as small, medium-sized business, we have tons of SaaS because it's just easy to subscribe and easy to consume and everything is OpEx. So from a Zero Trust perspective or ZTMM Plus, do I need to worry about from the network and identity two pillars we're talking about here, anything I need to worry about and then anything I need to change or modify?
So I'm going to start with, it's interesting that you stated that from an access management or an SSO perspective, one of the things I caught is, the only thing you really have going on inside of the Entra ID or the Azure environment is M365. You've got a lot of SaaS-based platforms. It is very, very easy to start rolling out single sign-on to those SaaS platforms. So take away the capability to have all these identities across the systems in multiple SaaS platforms and integrate them directly with the SaaS platform, with specifically in this case, SaaS or with Entra ID. Through that process, some of the stuff that Jason was already talking about, now you can start to implement the roles and conditional access policies, which really drive things like multi-factor authentication. Can you access it from this location? Can you access it from your home? Where can you access? Do I need additional security controls to support that? So I would look immediately to start driving towards how do I integrate those SaaS platforms as a core part of the single sign-on so you can start to control when and what and how access is granted through access policy to support that. That'd be the first step I take.
Seems like I don't need to buy anything new. I just need to leverage what I have to kind of tighten that security of the identity and access management, make sure the authentication, and that might actually save and reduce the frustration and managing the cumbersome passwords, because then I just need to figure out managing one password. That'll get me access to all the things I need to do my day job.
Yeah, and what I would say is it would take away any kind of consternation with your neighbor's son that's going off to college and someone else that has to ultimately try and manage this thing.
But you make an interesting point, Victor, which is, and we see this a lot, I would say almost every organization, is that they can get started with their zero trust journey without having to buy new technology. Do most of them buy new technology? Yes, at some point. But this is not a type of journey where you got to spend a lot of money up front before you can get started. In almost every case, they would look at this and say, oh, you know what? We have this and we have that. We just need to use this better. And we need to change that process. We need to have a little bit of more rigor around this type of life cycle. And they can absolutely start that journey very quickly.
And one thing I'll add to that, the interesting thing behind that is having a platform like Entra ID or Azure gives you a platform approach so that you don't have to go out and purchase all new equipment. You can start to build everything you're doing inside the ecosystem that you've already bought into. That would be a huge advantage.
Okay. Based on your experiences and what you have done for other customers, what is, I would say, the common theme of the first step that people start with zero trust after the ZTMM plus assessment? Like, is there a common theme? Is there like, 70% of the companies that we have done this assessment, they start with this one step. Is there a common theme with it?
So I'll start from an identity perspective. The first thing that I see a lot of organizations really strive for is really that first question I asked around elevated privileges. Separating elevated privileges. You as a CEO having the global admin, and that's what you're logging on to, which means you probably get your email through that, which means now you have exploded your attack surface exponentially beyond of what it should be. So a lot of organizations, the first thing is let's separate these accounts. Let's start to create some sort of practice that supports separation, password rotation, role-based access control, so that you're not incorporating your day-to-day job with something like a domain admin or a global admin in an Entra ID environment. So supporting that privileged access management solution, that use case. You have contractors, the capability for them to remote in through a privileged access management solution without having to expose your network or expose your environment where you don't necessarily need to. So that's usually a very sound and strong first place that most organizations we talk to start with.
Got it. Okay. Anything on the OT side or the wireless segmentation? Jason, you mentioned about the network that I should have different zones, different subnets, different VLANs, and separate them. Is it as simple as this knowing that if my, let's say, accountant he needs to get on the Wi-Fi or not, or is it as simple as just separate them? As long as it's separate, it's good to go. Or do I need to get one step further where who does need access to that network and how they connect to it?
Yeah, the coarse-grained segmentation is definitely just a first step. And you really want to get to where you have a much richer set of context upon which to make these access decisions. So incorporating identity attributes and device attributes and workload attributes and overall context of what's going on in the environment, where preventing the 70% of the company who doesn't need access to the OT network is a good first step, but you really want to get to the point where you've really cranked that down to the bare minimum. Where, let's say your engineering folks, maybe they don't need 24/7 access. They only need it when there's a problem. So you would tie that access, let's say, to a service desk ticket, and they only get access to a specific system if they have a service desk ticket that's assigned to them that says, hey, Sally, you're the lead engineer. You have to log into system ABC and fix something. And except under those circumstances, they wouldn't get any access to that whatsoever.
Jason, we'll start with you, Jerry. The identity. Would you give me one example of one of the functions or one of the things that has different levels, like traditional, initial, advanced, optimal? What does that journey looks like? If I am where I am today, from what you have heard from the identity and authentication perspective, I'm sure traditional or below that. But what are the different steps I would take to get to optimal, for example? What does that steps looks like? And then we'll come to you, Jason, for the networking as well.
So from a authentication perspective, right? What I'm hearing from you is you're very traditional because you're using user ID and password, no multi-factor authentication. To move to you did say a little bit of you get a text message, I believe.
I get a text message, but it's not for every user. They
That's
just
right.
get using a password. Yeah.
That's right. So to move to initial, it's to get that SMS or email. That's kind of an initial stage so that you're at least initializing some multi-factor authentication. As you move on, you want to go from initial to advanced. This is where you're going to get more of the phishing resistant MFA. So some of the Microsoft Authenticator push notifications, any of the other not necessarily biometric, but any of the other possibly biometric solutions, right? That give you the capability to determine this is who you are. We know who you are. We know what you are. We have some of that information. That'll get you to the advanced.
Okay.
To really get to optimal, this is where I think a lot of organizations struggle because they don't know how to get here. And that's really that passwordless, pure passwordless, pure biometric, all MFA across the board. So not just one user or a subset, where you're continuously authenticating, ensuring that the authentication process is one that is secure. It's more than that, who you are and what you are and what you know, right? It's who you are, what you know, where you are, and some of those other components that will drive that context.
Where you're logging in from, which device, and all that context.
That's right.
Okay.
And so as you start to build that out, that's how you would go from like the traditional / initial to the optimal, where now the authentication, and from a user perspective, let's be very clear. From a user perspective, this improves their experience.
Sure. Yeah.
And
I don't have to remember passwords.
That's right. And then ultimately, from a security perspective, you can start to implement as many security controls across the board as necessary because you're not really changing that user experience at that point.
For sure. For sure. Let me ask you this. How many of these functions are in identity? Like number of the count? How many are these?
There are 6 functions.
Okay.
Plus the 3 cross-cutter functions.
So about 9 in identity. Okay.
Specifically in identity, there are 9 functions that we go through.
Got it.
And to kind of break that down further, there are specific aspects to each function. So to give you an example, our user authentication function, it has the generic, how are you authenticating, user ID and password. It has the privileged access management side. So now we add elevated users as a part of that. And then what are the methods for single sign-on? So these are aspects of part of the authentication function that we go through to give you a little more insight.
So one of the questions that I got, how do you scope it? So a lot of people think this as a compliance thing, right? Like when you're going through it, is it the entire organization? So for example, I have 199 employees who are using passwordless. There is one employee who's still using username and password, no MFA, no passwordless, no passkeys. Would you consider me as traditional because there's one remaining, or can I say my scope is 199 and that one is exempt from this conversation?
The answer is it depends, right? It's okay. Why is that user? You have to answer that question of why that user. Why is that user an exception? Is there something about the business function they do? And more importantly, is that a risk that the business is willing to accept? And that's what you have to take into consideration when you do that.
Yeah, the assessment is there's always an art to this. And it's, in many cases, we'll work in the enterprise and we'll realize, oh, you know what? They actually have 2 areas of their business and it makes sense to evaluate them separately. Sometimes for the whole thing, more often than not, it might be, we're just going to evaluate them separately for identity because they're so different. So that's really, there's some judgment calls that have to go along with that, which is fine. And what's important is that when we do that we communicate, this is, this evaluation is for this part of the scope and that one is for that part of the scope.
Okay, got it. And Jason, for you, if you can walk me through one function, one aspect of the network from traditional to optimal, just like Jay did for identity authentication.
Sure. So let's talk about network segmentation and in particular user access. So north-south, user to service access. So a traditional network would be flat, much like your network.
Yeah.
Completely open, and there's really no restrictions. Once you're on the network, you can see at a network level every device. Okay. As you get to the initial step of Zero Trust, what you would see is some basic coarse-grained segmentation of the network by production state or business function, for example. Like, and VLANs are very common. Oh, there's a production VLAN, there's an employee VLAN, or maybe there's like a finance VLAN.
Sure.
for example. And you may have some initial pilots or pockets where you have more fine-grained segmentation, like we're going to isolate the HVAC system, we're going to isolate the security cameras. As you move toward advanced, now what you're doing is you see some substantial areas of the network have this type of fine-grained network access controls that's enforced using these contextual access policies that we know and love. And you have a plan in the roadmap to enforce that finer-grained access control more broadly, ideally completely across the network. And then in the optimal state, you'll be doing this really everywhere, right? Everywhere has a little asterisk, which is everywhere except perhaps a few documented and known exceptions. But everywhere else, you're requiring strong authentication, device posture check, you're requiring and enforcing these fine-grained access controls at a network layer. So that's what the progression looks like for a user-to-service access pathway.
And would you say that if, let's say, I do have this one or two users or devices or areas where I can't enforce zero trust, I can't enforce my policies, would you say it'd be best to actually carve that out of the main network or the main policy so that they get their exception policies, they're managed separately? Would you advise that, or it would be more like against zero trust strategy?
No, it would be carving them out and separate them and isolate them as much as possible. And OT is a great example. On your OT network, you're going to be running on typically older hardware, maybe antiquated hardware, weak authentication, and you know that these systems might even have things like hard-coded admin credentials. I mean, there's some crusty old stuff in the OT world. So that's a risk, and you just have to recognize and say, okay, we're going to separate that network, and regular users can't get onto it. You have to be in the building. You have to have this control or that control, and we're going to monitor it so that if something weird starts happening, we'll detect it pretty quickly. That's a nice set of compensating controls where you're constrained because you can't replace this 20-year-old CNC system because you've invested, $1 million in all that hardware.
Yeah, running on Windows 95 actually. Yeah. Excellent. I love it. Anything else you want to add to our assessment, or should we move to our wrap up?
One of the always the interesting things about the assessments we found is that when we have this, that Jerry and I will run these and we'll ask a lot of questions, but it so often turns into cross-team learning from one another. But we'll ask a question about, let's say, user authentication, and someone will say, oh, we do it this way and that way. And someone will say, oh, wait a minute, that's not exactly true. Actually, for these users, we do it this way. Or don't forget, we've got that legacy system over there. Or no, actually, we tried to do that. It didn't work. So there's a lot of cross-team learning that comes from these conversations, which is always super valuable.
Got it. Okay. So we'll wrap on this one. As again, I played the role of customer. I would ask you, if you're my advisor on this assessment and zero trust strategy, how can zero trust actually build external trust with customers, regulators, or partners? Like, how would this help me as a business to prove that I'm doing everything and continue providing that due care, fiduciary duty to my customers, regulators, or partners, investors?
I mean, clearly eliminating and avoiding audit findings, problems, and avoiding incidents is one part of this. But those are sometimes, eliminating the audit findings is clearly going to be something that's measurable. Another way that's measurable is that having this higher level of security will open the door in many cases to additional customers, where you've seen this, right? Where customers or prospects, I should say, have requirements that are imposed into your contracts. You have to prove that you've done A, B, and C in terms of security controls in your environment. You have to prove you're protecting our data and things like that. So by addressing this and improving your maturity, you now are going to be able to go to your salespeople and say, yes, we have this CMCC certification, or yes, we can answer that we do A, B, and C. So now you can go after that contract.
Roger.
I would add that, in the last 24 hours, I've had 3 conversations about how does zero trust help things like cyber insurance. And that's always a question. And the answer is, well, it's not a direct relationship. The cyber insurance organizations are not saying, hey, do you do zero trust? No, that's not the answer. But when they start asking questions about, are you applying MFA everywhere? Well, that's a question we start addressing and we start talking about. And that's something the cyber insurance company talks a lot about. The second piece is the privileged elevated privileged users, right? So the privileged access component. That is another big piece that your cyber security, your cyber insurance are asking about. So these are natural questions that we go through that while we're not going, a cyber insurance company is not going to say, go do a zero trust assessment. The outcomes of this assessment and what we do drive better relationship and help support those cyber insurance needs that you're looking for.
100%. And that's exactly what I was going to bring up, where how does the zero trust strategy, and again, the questions that you ask in it does cross over a lot of the compliance as well. So if you're PCI, HIPAA, if you are CMMC, if you are CCPA, GDPR, the questions are overlapping. At the end of the day, it's a basic hygiene of the cybersecurity. Are you doing it or not? And cyber insurance directly ties back to those questions. So zero trust would not be asked, which they should actually ongoing now. If you're doing zero trust, your premium is half. Go, have fun. But at the end of the day, it's the same question. So Jerry, Jason, thanks so much for walking us through this fictitious company assessment. Again, this was a teaser trailer, but I think this gives our audience and listeners a taste of what this assessment could look like if they go through it. And this will give them a prioritized roadmap, what they need to prioritize and how to actually build a proper strategy and execute that maturity model.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. For our listeners, that is all for today. If you want to connect with Jason or Jerry, search Numberline Security. They both are on LinkedIn as well. We will put their URLs directly in the show notes. Once again, thank you for listening and tuning into Zero Trust Journey podcast. We will see you in the next episode.
That's a wrap on this Zero Trust journey. Now it's your turn. Step into the spotlight, share your story, and be part of the journey. Subscribe to Zero Trust Journey on LinkedIn for the latest news, events, and giveaways. Until next time.